Welcome to Discograffiti, the music podcast that delivers the objective truth about the entire discography of every single artist and band that ever existed.
I am your host, Joe Kennedy.
And I'm Dave Gebro.
My co-host.
That's true.
As it were.
And good pally.
My good pally. Today's episode kind of takes us back to the 1970s, which we are old enough to remember, just barely.
It was a good time. It was a simpler time.
What are some of the things you remember from the 1970s?
I remember those shirts that had the iron-on letters and iron-on patterns. I had Rocky ones. I had BGU's ones.
I had an R2-D2 one.
Oh, God. I loved those. The 70s, I liked all the fads that happened in the 70s. The bell-bottoms, the shag carpeting, the real gaudy interior design. You probably hate that. You like the classy
At the
stuff.
time, it just seemed normal, you know, but like it would last forever. There would never be any other. We had the wallpaper in the living room that was like the forest, the trees, the forest.
Oh,
kind of
yes.
thing. Yeah, it's a good time.
That's amazing.
I was up until like the 90s.
I was actually,
For a
this is an odd story, but I did Big Brother, Little Brother,
Mm-hmm.
and I had a little brother, and I only had him a couple times because there was some weirdness with his grandma who he lived with. His grandma lived in a house that was completely enshrouded in jungle, and it had piped in jungle noises, too. So you walk in, and you are transported entirely out.
That's not a 70s thing. That's just a weirdo person thing.
Exactly, but you went to the wallpaper deal.
You ever get into Dynamite magazine? You're into that?
I never got out of it.
How about Pizzazz?
Bananas magazine?
Pizzazz was really the one that was my
I don't
jam.
remember Pizzazz.
was
Dynamite
like
was a big thing.
Dynamite was made more early 80s, I guess, now that I think about it.
Yeah, late 70s, early 80s, yeah.
Pizzazz was like Marvel Comics, and that was like their like version of like Cream or something. Not even Cream, like Hit.
Right.
It was like their teeny bopper kind of.
I
think it was aimed at tweens, but it was like Marvel Comics.
That one passed me by, but I remember the bookmobile would come by. You'd order Dynamite and bananas. And
Right.
Of course, not Mad and Cracked, because you have to go down to the newsstand for that junk.
Right.
Anyway, so... Joe, on this episode of Discograffiti,
We're turning the spray cans, this time on the Bee Gees. We were returning to their 1970s.
we continue to
peak.
spray them.
We're we're kind of at the beginning of a new, you might say, a new phase.
Now we enter a completely new phase for them. They've been a valid concern for 10 years at this point.
They're kind of running out of steam on the sort of soft rock, maudlin, sappy wuss ballads. They're kind
You're being very generous. They ran out of steam, and then they continued running out of steam on an unreleased record that has a shitty title. So now we're at phase 4, On Top of the World, 1974 to 1980. Now, I want to clarify this, okay? Because most people will say, 1974? What in the fuck, Dave? They really started fashioning and really burnishing their sound that following year during Main Course. And yes, you'd technically be correct. But let's get something straight. 1974's Mr. Natural is the transitional record, and all the seeds of their greatness are sprinkled throughout. Am I not right, Joseph?
Yeah, this is where they kind of start dipping their toe in the R&B waters, and they're kind of there's some kind of pillowy Fender Rhodes kind of jams on this, and they kind of.
This is also the first one to be produced by Arif Mardin.
Yeah, and they start kind of including some funk, and they're not really ready to fully move on from the limp wuss ballad kind of format. They kind of hedge their bets, and
but yet it's kind of cool. Like it works. It blends all together. It doesn't feel like just a dumping ground for songs. It coheres.
Yeah, this is a definitive like transitional kind of album, and this is the kind of record where we're talking about Mr. Natural now. That this is 1974. Mm-hmm. This is the kind of records that I hope to find on this podcast. These kind of interesting turning points, and when you're listening to them all in a row, you can kind of really see how this is, a key.
You can hear the train run out
them.
of steam and then reignite. It's cool.
Yeah, this does feel like a rejuvenation for sure. They're trying something different. It was much needed.
So many great songs, man. Charade, Throw a Penny, which goes into Down the Road.
Did you say charade?
Charade. Sorry, I'm so sorry.
Charade.
I'm sorry. Please edit that. Throw a Penny, which then segues into Down the Road. That's a serious departure for them, and I love it. I really love it. Voices is incredible. The title track,
Yeah,
and then Dogs is the beginning of the falsetto.
Yeah, they've got a whole different palette here. They're kind of they've kind of given up the acoustic guitar based, folky maudlin piano ballads, and they're kind of in the world of they're more like a funk R&B kind of palette. Clavinet, Fender Rhodes,
More like a head nodding thing, not necessarily a dance deal, but you could dance to it.
Yeah, it's a step on the way to the disco sound that they would soon. This is definitely not disco yet. It's on the beginning stages, and as you mentioned, they discovered the what I call the Banshee falsetto. So they had already sang in Bee Gees-ish falsetto on some of their previous tracks. How Can You Mend a Broken Heart has that kind of whispery, airy falsetto, kind of more traditional falsetto, but this one they kind of discovered the Banshee sound.
He broke through the glass ceiling of his lungs.
It's
and
kind of up
figured
in the
something out.
kind of up in that sort of hyena kind of range.
And why is it just like it? Even though they had their ups, they had their downs since all this time. It always sounds and feels so good to hear that voice.
It does. It's a strange sound, really. It's a pretty idiosyncratic way of singing. Like
Yeah.
it's a weird.
So it was discovered during this song Dogs, and it really is just a kind of a background vocal during a bridge. Not anything major, it just kind of slips by. But then the next record, which we'll get to in a minute, then they really capitalize on it. Mr. Natural, I give that 4 stars.
Yeah, it's definitely side 2 fizzles out a little bit, and the title cut is on side 2, but most of the good stuff is on side 1. It's a little bit front loaded, but interesting record. I gave this 4 stars.
No bad songs, just a couple of weaker songs.
Yeah, but the ones that are really interesting are kind of like you mentioned, Throw a Penny, Charade.
Right, Charade. I stand corrected. But then
I say that because he says it very prominently.
He does.
In my charade.
I feel like a fool in a bath of Fender Rhodes as well.
I have it spelled in my notes CHRAAAHHDE.
Nice. You really kept with their tradition.
Yes. Yeah.
So then they crossed paths fortuitously with Eric Clapton. And he said, hey, you guys should go down to Florida and make a record at this place, Criteria Studios. Mm-hmm. And then, so they did. And they actually stayed in the house that Eric Clapton had rented for his shitty record. Mm-hmm. And it turned out, I guess it was really good advice, because the album that was made there was 1975's Main Course.
Which has 2 very seminal singles on them where they kind of really invented and discovered their own take on disco. Which is still kind of has not fully taken over the world yet. They kind of helped that to happen. They have a particularly very commercial take on disco, and they
quick shout out, Blue Weaver. This is his first record.
Right, yeah.
You can take it from here because I know you know him.
Yeah, Blue Weaver's the keyboard guy.
He's awesome. And by the way,
kind of a key member of the team.
Yeah, his keyboard stuff on How Deep Is Your Love, which comes later, that's his stuff.
Right. Yeah. He's a key member for pretty much this whole period. Again, this is now they're kind of really full on disco, and it's a radically different sound. Right when you put this record on, it really kind of jumps out of the speakers. It starts off with Nights on Broadway. Big hit for them. Definitely a song I remember really well from my childhood. And then Jive Talkin'.
Jive Talkin' is nuts.
Yeah, even a bigger hit for them.
That's my favorite song on the record. I mean, that's a staggering song. It's up there with all their best work.
Yeah, yeah. It's got maybe the most danceable 7/4 figure ever created.
And you know what that's inspired by, right? That's when he would go over the bridge to go to Criteria every day from where he was staying. Mm-hmm. That was a of the bridge.
Oh, I see. Yeah. That's kind of the intro rhythm. There's the instrumental part, the little synth lick that goes do 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 do.
Yeah, I love.
So that's actually in 7/4, and they make it sound seamlessly kind of funky. They kind of just play the straight disco beat through it, and it kind of ends up like when you make 7 + 7, it's 14, so it comes out as an even number again. So a little kind of mathy thing in there.
I love when math gets funky.
It's pretty sweet.
You should feel math in your ass, not your head. I tried to feel it. I could never feel it in my
Isaac
ass.
Newton invented calculus, it was mostly because he felt it in his ass.
That's documented proof. So
There's a few ballady kind of songs in here. There's still kind of
good ones though. Baby, As You Turn Away, Edge of the Universe.
Some of that I don't really like.
I like that stuff. Wind
Songbird,
of
I'm not
Change,
really into.
Fanny. Songbird is not as good, but I don't think it's bad.
Yeah, they also
Come On Over is great.
They also kind of
Great pedal steel.
They get into this whole period where that's their kind of their disco reign of glory is the other sound they kind of always have going is kind of this soft rock, like yacht rocky sort of thing that kind of takes on a real 70s like bedroom vibe in this period. So there's that, Fanny is kind of like that. It's kind of
That's Blue Weaver, man.
yeah, it kind of exists in the zone between disco and soft rock. I had never heard that song before. It was kind of a hit. It went to number 12 on the chart.
And you called it Fanny, not Be Fanny, parenthesis, Be Tender With My Love, close parens.
I guess that's the actual full title.
Close parens is actually written out as the song title.
they do the banshee voice in that one. That's a good one. That's on the playlist.
Yeah.
That's a
Yeah,
playlist
Wind
jam.
of Change. There's a bunch
They
of
do
good
a lot.
ones.
They fully embrace the banshee thing on this
Look,
one.
I don't
They
think
do it a lot.
I don't think it's a perfect record. I give it 4 stars. Generally, I think it's a little overrated compared to Mr. Natural, because Mr. Natural was the exciting stumbling upon the origins of a new sound. This is like it's already sort of encased.
Yeah, I also gave this 4. It's pretty solid. There's another thing I kind of like about we're kind of in their full on disco period now, and they reach such massive heights that I was surprised doing this how there's not really that much of it. There's a couple of disco records. There's like 3.5 or something disco records that were there, and even those aren't really full on disco all the time. There's not really a giant reservoir of full on Bee Gees disco songs.
No, you'd have to actually collate something like what we're doing, but it'd be pointless because we already did it.
Right.
So go on Spotify, go on Discography.
But there's one song on Main Course that kind of is in a category of songs that I'm interested in, and there's a bunch of here, which are kind of like
Which one?
Wind of Change.
Yeah, great song.
Which it was not a hit, but it's like on an alternate universe timeline, it was like as big a hit as one of their other disco songs.
Definitely going on the playlist.
So,
it's a great one.
There's a bunch of those in here that are kind of like almost as good as the big smash hits, but that you're not sick of hearing a million times. So
Yeah, sleeper greats.
if that's kind of your thing, there's a good batch.
It's certainly our thing,
It's my thing.
because here we are.
I'm the kind of person that imagines alternative timelines where songs like Wind of Change were smash hits.
Right,
If
because
that sounds like you,
because we retired early.
right?
Or something like that.
Right.
1976, Children of the World. Now, I want to talk just a little bit about backstory, just for a second. This was a huge album for them. You Should Be Dancing went to number 1. You got Love So Right and Boogie Child, also big hits. So they recorded at the same studio, Criteria. At first, Richard Perry came in, at the time he was sort of a superstar producer. But after a couple weeks, it seemed like it wasn't working out. So the Bee Gees decided to produce themselves, with Barry Gibb mainly taking the active role, along with an engineer named Carl Richardson. Then they added a young musician and someone who helped them arrange named Albie Galutin. I haven't seen a YouTube video on how to pronounce his name properly, so I hope I'm not doing
Albie
it
Galutin,
disservice.
he's kind of a big producer name. He did a lot of stuff in the biz over the years.
So
But
he's-
he was very young then. This is one of the first things he did.
He came on as advisor. Now, this was the team that saw them through the next 4 years. Now we're at the Imperial phase. This is kind of this lasted for 4 years. One bizarre piece of trivia. Guess who plays percussion on You Should Be Dancing?
It's uncredited.
Yes,
Who is it?
Stephen Stills.
Oh, cool.
He was in town snorting coke instead of actually going on a tour with Neil Young, who snubbed him during the tour with a telegram that said "Eat a peach," and so he hung out with the Bee Gees and did percussion while high on cocaine. So
and shredded it.
that's right. That's right.
He played some fierce bongos on that show.
That's right. He did take some fierce
Not for
rips.
nothing. Whoever did play the bongos on that was killing it.
Thank you,
So it's probably
Stephen.
Steven.
And at that era, he really wasn't doing much else of anything worthy of note. But in any case, Love So Right is fantastic, right?
Banshee voice ballad.
Right. Lovers, so rubbery sounding and modern. I really like
Lovers
that.
is really bonkers. Lovers made me think. that's a song I will definitely be listening to. I was not really aware of it before. It's a little bit campy. And it kind of made me question, like, what is it about this period that I really like so much? I mean, some of these songs are like, I mean, they have some camp factor. You know, there's kind of like porn-tastic kind of wah-wah guitars happening.
But then it's
and
also
like crazy
for real.
synths and
Like you
but then there's also a lot of skill and craftsmanship involved in it. And the songs, you know, let's be honest, the songs fucking slap.
Yeah,
songs,
they really, really do. I mean,
you know,
now
songs.
Everything is locked in. I mean, these guys are on motherfucking fire now. I mean, they're like a machine cranking it out. If there wasn't, you know, Kaminsky Park, I mean, this could have kept going and going a lot longer if, you know, there weren't other factors in the way. But in any case, I love this record. I give it 4.5 stars.
Yeah, I gave it the same, 4.5. There's
oh, by the way, Subway's on this.
Yeah, that's another one that's kind of like one of those alternate timeline hits.
Exactly.
There's a bunch of those. There's a couple of
Subway should have been huge, man.
You Stepped Into My Life is another one that
Right.
these are all songs that could have been hit
Can't
singles.
Keep a Good Man Down, Boogie Child.
Barry's songwriting just kind of fits like a glove with the disco format. You know, he can kind of pull out these big hooks. And by the way, this has become almost entirely a Barry lead vocal experience by this point.
Right. These
Barry
guys are
sings-
pushing the background. By the way, Maurice, I know for sure, is suffering from murderous alcoholism at this point.
Yeah, Barry's
and is
singing
not
everything
very active.
and is way out front, and the other two guys are kind of like backup singers,
Right.
More so even than usual.
And by the
Barry's
way,
kind of writing most of everything.
with I should say without apparently without animosity.
Yeah,
because they always went where things they felt needed to go.
Yeah.
So it would be whomever forward. So when the public eventually got sick of that falsetto sound, the Robin and Maurice came up and started writing songs again. But in any case, we will get to that. So then we have a double live album, which we're not going to rate.
Yeah,
but,
we kind of have a no live album policy
unless it's
right.
crucial. But I just want to say, just because I had so much experience with it when I was a kid, my dad always played it. So it's called Here at Last, Bee Gees Live. I want to say that there's 2 sets of ellipses there. Okay, so it was recorded December 20th, 1976, released in May 77. I love the record, but then we move on to Saturday Night Fever, 1977. Just some stupid soundtrack that they were asked by Robert Stigwood to contribute a few songs to based on a stupid article in a magazine. So they said begrudgingly, or maybe not begrudgingly, I'm kind of making this story up as I go along, except for the facts. Sure, here's a few songs we were working on. And a legend is born.
Yeah, it's hard to understate how omnipresent Saturday Night Fever was and how much of a smash hit it was, and how much the world was
40 million copies. And I want to say it's the second biggest selling soundtrack of all time, but it's a double album.
You know, my dad's a singer. My dad was in the nightclub business singing at the time, you know, and did for many, many years. And we lived in South Florida. We lived in Fort Lauderdale, just 20, 30 miles north of Miami. And I mean, the world was just like Saturday Night Fever. It was
Right.
like it was, you know, everything seemed to have that that kind of patina to it, that kind of glamorous late 70s.
And the funny thing about it, or the apt thing about it, is that in 67, when Sgt. Pepper seemed to change everything and create a summer of love, they've been aping the Beatles or just kind of riding through that shadow. I don't mean to even sound pejorative about it because they're so good at it for many years. And now they create their own phenomenon cycle.
Yeah, I mean, they were, you know, disco. You could do a whole podcast on just the rise and
Just
fall
disco,
of disco
yeah.
alone. And in fact, there is a very good episode of the podcast, You're Wrong About, that talks about Disco Demolition Night and the rise of disco as a, you know, in the clubs and as an underground kind of phenomenon, and then its explosion into popular culture, and, you know, Disco Demolition Night, how that was like the backlash against disco, which was really kind of a racist sort of backlash against disco, which was black music. You know, the Bee Gees were the commercial avatars of that. And then, but when it came down, they really kind of fell the very, 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 very hard.
And which is not here. Now, here's the crazy thing about that. Okay. So Saturday Night Fever becomes the embodiment, maybe the pinnacle, maybe like we're just over the hill with regards to disco. Okay, it becomes synonymous with it. They're on the cover along with John Travolta. Mm-hmm. There's only 5 songs that they wrote that are in the movie, and 4 of them are performed by the Bee Gees.
Yeah, it's really kind
one
of
of them's not even performed by the Bee Gees.
Right, it's really only side 1 of Saturday Night Fever that is the like new Bee Gees material.
Because a lot of that record is just like pointless elaborations on a theme. There's not a lot. There's a bunch of filler. The whole record's great because it's of its time and it's a document.
Yeah, there's other stuff on it like
a fifth of Beethoven,
the Always and Forever, the Tavares ballad.
Right. The Tramps' Disco Inferno, I think, is the second best thing on the record, other than the Bee Gees.
Right. Now, if you possess a copy of the vinyl album itself, it's a wonderful artifact to own. It feels like owning a Rubik's Cube or like a Darth Vader action figure or something.
A pet rock.
It was just everywhere.
Yeah.
I kind of treasure my original dog-eared copy of it.
Yeah.
Before the movie came out and was really became a huge hit and this huge cultural phenomenon, the first single from it was How Deep Is Your Love, a ballad, and maybe their very greatest song. If you sit down at a piano and figure out the chord changes to How Deep Is Your Love, that is a beautifully written song.
The opening alone of that is just such perfection. You just never really often get that in a song. I mean, it's very, very special.
Yeah, that song has aged very well. It still sounds great.
That is probably that's got to be my favorite.
That's that's like some of their very greatest song, really. And it was, huge hit.
But then you got Staying Alive.
Right. I mean, all the songs on side 1 that they released, except for one, went to number 1. The only one that did not go to number 1 was More Than a Woman, or as I like to call it, Bald-Headed Woman.
Oh man!
But that song surprisingly was not really a smash hit. That was a top 40 hit. But
all of them are great. You got Staying Alive, How Deep Is Your Love, Night Fever, More Than a Woman, and then sung by Yvonne Elliman, you have If I Can't Have You.
Right, which
and they're all great.
If I Can't Have You is a definitive.
I don't want nobody, baby.
It's a definitive disco format kind of song.
It is fucking awesome.
Great song, great hook.
Look, it's definitely so bulging at the seams. It's so, glutted with filler. It would have been an insanely good single album with the Bee Gees tracks on side 1 and a couple instrumentals leading into Boogie Shoes and Disco Inferno on side 2, just my own personal opinion. However, just the essential tracks, 5 stars, unquestionably.
5 stars.
I mean,
forget about it. 5 stars.
Yeah.
Get out of here.
I know. So now these guys are riding so high that almost nobody has experienced success like this. Now, all of a sudden, I want to do a tendril that sneaks out because Barry takes on a different persona. He now becomes a writer and producer and star maker. So
he's sort of like a like Max Martin, like
a Svengali,
Dr. Luke kind of guy, where he's like writing and arranging and producing these songs, singing on them sometimes.
He's got his finger pressed right on the zeitgeist. Everything he touches goes to gold. So at first, it's Samantha Sang, Emotion. I love this song. I've always loved it. Written by Barry and Robin. Bee Gees in the background singing.
Samantha Sang sings that song, sort of.
Yeah, you did.
It's really Barry kind of puts it over. In the choruses, it's really just it's a Bee Gees song, very thinly veiled, as somebody else says.
I've always loved it. I can't believe they gave such A-class material out. That's the thing. He was just really on fire.
Yeah, it's a first-rate disco ballad. Smash it. Went to number 2, 5 stars.
I want to talk very briefly about Andy motherfucking Pipsqueakin' Bibb,
the cousin Oliver of the Bee Gees.
Yeah. So, in my opinion, the songs that Gibb had were mainly Barry's tired cast-offs. By the way, Samantha Sang, Emotion, 5 stars. So these are mainly, I believe, Barry Gibb's tired cast-offs he gave to his poor brother. So like a shitty Oshkosh Bagosh overall hand me down. Andy Gibb in 1977 got "I Just Want to Be Your Everything." That went to number one. In my opinion, Bee Gees Light. Never loved it, but it'll do in a pinch.
You know, the Andy Gibb songs, the ratio of like how big of a hit they were is directly proportional to how good the song is.
Right.
The ones that are bigger hits seem like the ones that are better.
That song I give 3.5 stars.
I give that 4 stars.
That's probably it's got to be my favorite of
I like
his.
that one.
Then in 77, Love is Thicker Than Water, another number one hit.
Serviceable.
This fucking stinks. I give it 1.5
That's
stars.
serviceable. I gave it 3 stars.
No fucking
Not
way.
amazing, but
holy shit. Shadow Dancing, number one.
another smash for Andy.
My notes, no. It just says no.
No, I like this.
I give it 2
Shadow
stars.
Dancing is fucking catchy.
You know what starts happening here is I feel like the studio results are a little bit rushed. So there's a very thin and cheese-like synth line that starts to float through the records.
Yeah, these are all kind of pot boilers. They're kind of cranking these out pretty fast. There's a bunch of them. There's so many hit singles in this short amount of time. Shadow Dancing is catchy, though. I give it 4 stars.
I give it 2. 1978 in Everlasting Love went to number 5.
Inessential.
1.5 stars.
2 stars.
1978, Your Love, Don't Throw It Away, went to number 9. We're slipping.
Good song, though.
Written for Saturday Night Fever, of an obviously higher quality than the lead-up would suggest. 4 stars.
4 stars for me. Kind of a pedestrian verse, but big, great hook.
Somehow this one works.
Well, okay.
1980, Desire went to number 4. It was intended for the Spirits LP, and it's one of only 2 tracks to feature all 4 Gibb brothers on it. His last top 10. 2.5 stars.
I gave it 2. It seems like these are starting to have an expiration date on them. Disco is...
And that's all I want to deal with
That's
Andy
more than
Gibb.
enough, Andy Gibb.
Yeah, no more, please. All right, 1978, the Grease soundtrack. Let's just talk about the one song.
The other
and the
thing,
phenomenon of Grease.
so Grease is the other thing that is just like has completely taken over the world. I mean, I guess John Travolta and the Bee Gees are kind of inexorably linked at this time. They're all up in this Grease soundtrack thing too. It's part of the 1970s, 1950s meld.
Right. Yeah, like Sha-Na-Na.
Sha-Na-Na, Happy
Yeah, yeah.
Days, and like it's boomers really like.
And like the
they
80s
go
with the
for
60s.
they go for
with
the
the, with
instant nostalgia.
80s with the 60s. It's a 20-year
Well, there's also
cycle.
there's 70s, 60s too. The Hair soundtrack is 70s,
everything,
60s.
but the thing is, everything in the 70s was 60s bleed over that just came out sideways.
Yeah. Why the fuck that a disco song was chosen for the theme to Grease?
How cool is that?
I never really will understand.
I know,
except
but he pulled it off and nobody even noticed, because this is the first time I'm having this conversation, and I've been familiar with this fucking song for about 40 years.
I noticed. It always seemed weird to me. I mean, not at the time. At the time, it made sense. But why is it a disco? I don't know.
I have no idea, but it's a great song.
It's good. I gave it 4 stars.
I give it 5.
It's a little bit campy. It's cool.
All right, now let's talk about the first pin in the balloon. We're still in superstar status, but what happened was the producer ran rampant. So, the Robert Stigwood, the manager, so he decided, I want to redo Sgt. Pepper as a movie and have the Bee Gees and a bunch of other dissimilar artists together in a whole bag, a stew, and shake it up.
This is not a pin in the balloon. This is like a cannonball being shot into the balloon.
I mean, I guess it's funny how much this sucks, but it's also got a mild what the fuck listenability factor. I would never. This is for Discography is the only time I've ever listened to this straight through without squirming out of it.
There's a lot of things about it that are weird. There's a lot of elements of it that are very strange.
First of all the Frankie Howard and Sandy Farina material is complete garbage.
Well, okay, so there's a movie attached to it, and the movie has some plot where it's like they're Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band, and Peter Frampton is Billy Shears, and then
And
like
George Burns does Fixin' a Hole.
George Burns is like God or something.
It's unbelievable.
Mr. Kite is involved, and like Mr. Must. All the like dumb characters from all the Beatles songs are in it. I think Lovely Rita's in it. Like,
You know what the Bee Gees blamed on the decision to do this? Mainly drugs. Yeah, they were we were all struggling with drug addiction.
That does explain a lot. So George Martin produced it, and a lot of the productions of the songs are kind of like weirdly faithful to the Beatles originals. So on some things, like I don't like on the title track, Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band, they're playing it like pretty much exactly note for note like the original, and they're all good musicians. It's like they have like it's all top session guys like Bernard Purdie and like the guys from Toto were playing on this. It's all like A-list top call session players, but it's terrible. Like it's like the magic of it's so obviously worse by so many miles that even though they're playing the same parts and trying to pull it off. It's a weird like ego trip George Martin thing too. It's like I'll produce this, but everything's got to stay like weirdly super faithful to the originals. Like,
there's some
things they try to reinvent, and those are even more strange.
There's all these projects around this time in all different forms of media that were birthed from cocaine. This is one of them. There's, what else is a really fascinating one is the 1980 Popeye movie by Robert Altman.
Right.
Apparently, the location was actually found because it was a famous port for cocaine. So the whole fucking set was just an excuse for cocaine.
We'll go make a movie right at the source so we can get it straight off the boat. It's like getting really fresh fish or something.
It just shoots out in a geyser like you're at a waterfall or something. You gotta love conceptually this kind of stuff, but the actual stark reality of sitting down listening to it.
What was the Beatles' involvement in this? Did they give permission for this?
Zero. Well, I have no. I mean, they probably get a royalty.
There probably had to be some sort of permission that they had to give to use their intellectual property to make a movie out of it.
Yeah. I mean, I guess unless Dick James vacuumed up all.
Nobody really talks about their role in this atrocity.
Dick James got higher grade steak meat that year. I think that's probably what happened. So there were only two songs in this album that I could actually pluck out that I'd say are worth saving. That would be, and I know you'll disagree with me on this one, Robin Gibbs' "Oh Darling" I actually liked, and Earth, Wind & Fire's "Got to Get You Into My Life" is a natural.
Now, okay, so that one's pretty good. The Earth, Wind & Fire one's, and notably not produced by George Martin. The only thing on the record that was not produced by George Martin, and it was kind of like didn't really seem to have anything to do with the film. They just covered it. They're good at music. They weren't trying to do some faithful cover of it, and it's kind of a soul R&B song anyway. Suited them well. That's fine. The whole concept of this, and the Bee Gees are kind of not really very prominently on it. They don't really. Most of the songs that they appear on are backup singers to Peter Frampton.
There's a bunch of music hall razzmatazz that's in this. That's just such inessential listening.
I mean, it's not just bad. It's a desecration of something. It's aggressively bad.
I give it 1 star.
I give it 0 stars.
Really?
If this is the kind of thing to me that's like I want like a special kind of album to give 0 stars to, and this really earns it.
The 1 star for me is just for the conceptual what the fuck thing that gets my wheels spinning.
I don't really consider it a Bee Gees album. Like they are kind of participating in it, and they were marketed.
This is not a contender for worst album.
Yeah, no, that doesn't count in that. I agree.
Okay,
it's not truly a Bee Gees album.
So moving along to closer.
So this did a lot of damage to them, I feel. Or they say it did. They still had some pretty big hits. They still were like they still rode pretty high after this. But yeah, this is the first this is a pretty big ding in their credibility.
It was the ding in their credibility, but don't forget the next album had 3 number 1 songs on it. So, this is certainly not like, oh, man, the wind went out of our sails. They're riding very high. So, look, the album is called Spirits Having Flown from 1979. It's crazily front-loaded, like the apotheosis of front-loaded. Mm-hmm. There's 3 number 1 hits in a row, then 2 more great songs, and then you fall off a fucking cliff.
Yeah, outside of the 3 big singles, I find this record to be a little bit lacking. Still, there's some other good stuff on it. This is often, a lot of people will say this is like their best album or something. I don't really agree with that assessment of it. It's good. The production is pretty state of the art. They're recording it in 78. While they're on the absolute top of the world, while Saturday Night Fever is like dominating the culture. They're still ensconced at their little home at Criteria. They still have the main team around them. This is this is definitely the end of an era. You have the 3 smash hit singles, Tragedy,
Tragedy is awesome. One of the most over-dramatic songs I've ever heard in my life. Too Much Heaven's my favorite. From the record.
Worthy follow-up to How Deep Is Your Love. Great.
Yeah, truly in the same class as far as I'm concerned.
Great hook in the chorus. And then I don't really remember much about Love You Inside Out, but that was a number one single.
Yeah. I think that's it.
There are parts of it I remember. But when it first kicked on, I was like, this one doesn't sound familiar. But then... also number one hit.
You know what? Some piece of trivia about Love You Inside Out. It was the 9th and final number one U.S. hit for the Bee Gees.
Right, and they had, 6 right in a row?
So, yeah, that was a feat that had only been shared by Bing Crosby, Elvis Presley, and the Beatles.
Right. So the album starts off with the 3 singles, and then there's kind of a little mini, there's this kind of a yacht rock kind of bit in it. I think at this point they started publicly saying they were tired of getting pigeonholed as a disco act. So their reaction to try to branch out from doing only disco was some pretty straight up yacht rocky kind of jams.
And they really succeeded. I mean, I like them doing this sound. It's, a different take on some of the more lachrymose material from the early 70s.
It's the end of the 70s. The end of the 70s seemed to kind of go the same way the beginning of the 70s. It's like, we all need to cool out, man.
Right.
It's like,
let's take an assessment here.
I really do remember 1979 in particular having this kind of yacht culture. We lived in Florida. There's like palm trees, Three's Company's on the TV. Everybody's kind of at the beach and kind of smells like cocoa butter. It's like everybody's eating kind of carob brownies and health food and shit, and everybody's playing Fender Rhodeses.
I can almost
mellowing
smell
out.
that, dude. I can smell that.
Everybody needed to calm down. Man. We're all getting healthy and stuff.
So here's the stark reality. Well, first of all, I give that record 4 stars.
I gave it 3.5.
On the strength of the first side, it really is 4 stars because it really just kind of falls off a cliff.
Well, there's also one song on this, Living Together, which is kind of like the last ditch. That's the last ditch disco banger.
Not a good song.
But it's kind of the last disco song they would do. That's the closing of the chapter on the disco period. It's a second-rate song, but it's Bee Gees disco.
They only had one more top 10 single in the United States, and that didn't come until the song One reached number 7 in 1989. That was it. So
yeah, disco
now we're
hits,
going into a different...
Right, disco hits a severe brick wall in around 1980, I guess.
At Kaminsky Park, there was the blowing up of all the records like we had talked about. There was a turning away from that to go into, I think that was just the segue into Reagan culture, for better or worse, or whatever your opinion on it is. That's kind of where it went. But there was one record, one more, that I believe goes under the wire because the success of the record, and also because it was basically the Bee Gees with a female singer fronting them. In 1980, Barbra Streisand's Guilty. So it was Barry Gibb and Barbra Streisand. In early 1980, he co-produced, he wrote or co-wrote all 9 of the songs on the album. 4 of them were written with Robin. And the songs Guilty and Woman in Love, awesome.
I don't know. I'm not really a fan.
I like those 2 songs. I'm not rating this, but I think that goes kind of, I don't know. What can I tell you? I'm 49 years old.
I'm rating Barbra Streisand Guilty as, I give it the rating of Nope.
Really? Those 2 songs I
give it Nope and a half stars.
Guilty's awesome, dude. Guilty especially is awesome.
It's a weird thing. Okay, so adult contemporary music in itself is this kind of a strange phenomenon to me. So, we're obviously right in the middle of kind of Gen X. We're kind of classic straight up Gen Xers. We're born in 72. There's not really an equivalent of adult contemporary for Gen Xers, right? We're at the age now where, like, when our parents were our age, they might have started to listen to more adult contemporary sorts of things, and that was a thing that existed. What's the equivalent of that now?
There's no equivalent.
I mean, it's like Wilco, like adult contemporary. Not really. It's the closest thing. Like, it's just a strange.
Maybe mainly during Sky Blue Sky or something. But they moved out of that.
Not like the whole thing of adult contemporary music seems to not. It's a very boomer centric kind of thing.
It's a palliative for whatever woes came with making too much money.
Yeah, somebody who's a better expert than me about adult contemporary music could probably do a...
I mean, when you talk about things like Peter Cetera, I just don't understand why you would buy something like that.
Like, who's it for? I mean, I guess the thing is, though, but if you think about, like, did your mom have this record?
Did she? No, my mom.
No.
What? Which Barbra
Barbra
Streisand's
Streisand,
Guilty?
Guilty, yeah. Were you into it?
No, my mom didn't really have records.
Right. Yeah. But see, my mom was young at the time and kind of wasn't really
Look,
into this either.
the real thing is like when I,
But this record
you're
was a
tied
huge
to a
smash.
time and place. When I hear this stuff, I think of my mom's parents riding around in his giant Continental
Mm-hmm.
while he was listening to 10-10 wins. And then, Olivia Newton-John's Magic would come on,
Right.
or Guilty, and I just.
Well, I guess that's the thing. Some of those like Magic's a pretty good song. I think it's better than
love
anything on it.
Magic.
I don't know. I gave Guilty a spin, and just no.
Okay.
No.
All right.
I tried.
No,
I
no
tried.
worries. Well, that's the end of that phase.
Next phase.
Phase 5. And then there were 20 more years, 1981 to 2001.
Okay, now so going into this phase, we got to go through this kind of quickly because
We do.
it's pretty barren, and we don't want
But
to.
not
bore
at
you.
first. Not at first.
Well,
'Cause
there's a couple of
in
there's a couple of things.
1981, while they're working on their next album, which was to be called Living Eyes, they wanted to turn away from the sound that had made them famous or super famous. Okay, they had had the same
They
band.
wanted to turn away from it because it was no longer profitable.
That's right. That's right. We should turn to something else because, yeah, exactly that reason. So the band on these records that they'd been enormously successful with, Blue Weaver, Alan Kendall, and Dennis Bryan, the sessions broke down and those guys were fired. So now they're in unknown waters, and they got session musicians: Don Felder from the Eagles, Jeff Porcaro, Richard T., Steve Gadd. And
All the top class gents at the time.
right. And then Living Eyes also brought Robin and Maurice to the fore because Barry became too attached to that disco thing. So there's not a lot to recommend this.
They just didn't really know where to go. I mean, I guess I didn't even really know what does this sound like.
I don't know what
really
this is.
know what genre this is.
I don't
It's
think they knew where to go. They knew they had to go somewhere. And I'm going to be honest with everyone that's listening right now. They didn't really go anywhere for the remainder of their career. What they did was they changed producers. They tried to conform to current trends. And unfortunately, the songwriting, look.
This is where the songwriting gets kind of tentative. The hooks
Right.
don't really seem to be. When Barry would write for other people, he could still break out a pretty big hook.
Right.
But on this record, Living Eyes is almost a hookless kind of.
There's nothing great on this record. The only two songs that struck me were Soldiers.
He breaks out. He breaks out.
He has the falsetto.
He does the banshee.
But oddly, the least tired thing on the record. In the time signature stuff, there is a pinch of prog in there to keep the mix interesting.
I know.
I actually kind of like Soldiers.
It just seems like it's such a vastly different world in 1981 from 1979.
Very, very
so much
different.
has changed.
These guys
they're pariahs almost.
They're flailing. They don't know where they're going.
They're like actively disliked. It's very strange.
And a lot of this stuff it lapses over into facelessness. Especially with the dissolution of that core group of people they'd been playing with, and the quality of the material. While Barry was spreading himself thin, writing for all these other acts, I give it 1.5 stars.
I gave it 1 star. I didn't really like anything on it. I gave it 1 star for some like base level competency, but yeah, not into it.
Okay, so let's talk about something here, Joe. So they didn't make another album for 6 years. They knew after this that this was a dud, and they had to pretty much sit out the decade. So they went incognito. Okay, so they seemed to save up all the best material for other artists during all this time, right?
Yeah.
They didn't want to waste that stuff on the band itself.
Well,
'cause
Barry can still
remain
write.
unheard.
Yeah, Barry's still a top-notch writer. But Barry's a real craftsman. Barry can crank out a killer hook on demand, pretty much. Still, even at this time.
So we'll talk about in 1982, Dionne Warwick's "Heartbreaker." Not a great song, but a good song.
Also, kind of in that adult contemporary feel, but a good hook though. The hook's very memorable.
It's a softer version of what the Bee Gees normally do dance-wise.
Yes.
That my favorite farming out job that they did was 1983's "Islands in the Stream."
Smash hit.
Dolly and Kenny. I love that song. I love it both ironically and unironically.
I mean, you can really picture it, sung in the Banshee voice with the Bee Gees singing it.
I can
you
picture
can picture
being
them singing it.
back in a mall, walking through the mall, hearing it being piped through, but in a pleasant way. I give it 4 stars. Always a Always an anodyne to hear that one.
Yeah, I have 3 for Heartbreaker, 4 for Islands in the Stream.
Me too, buddy.
Wow.
You're my pally. All
I
right,
mean,
so
these are objectively, mathematically
these are
correct ratings. So.
That's right. For all of you and for us. 1983's soundtrack for Staying Alive. Let's talk about that for a second. So
I'll take bad ideas for 200, Alex.
now, this is a bad idea for a movie, okay? But let's work back from that. Let's pretend that this is a great movie, okay? What doesn't make sense to me, the formula for Saturday Night Fever felt almost like an accident, like a compendium of songs, but the Bee Gees just happen to have a few others. It's the Bee Gees on side one, and then it feels more like they tried to hedge their bets by filling the B side with other people.
Well, it's rough when your songs are getting outshined by Frank Stallone's.
Yeah, side
which
two
is
written
actually
by Frank Stallone.
what happens here.
Yeah. So I guess
There's kind of that. There's a one like Frank Stallone, like it's like a training montage kind of tune.
Yeah.
That was a hit, Far From Over. Remember that one?
I mean, vaguely, but
You would know it. You would know it if you heard it.
the only decent song that the Bee Gees even pull off here is "Someone Belonging to Someone." But that title is just—it makes me want to.
I don't really like any of it. I mean, it's kind of the early mid '80s now. It's '83. There's kind of ugly sounds all over it. It's got kind of bad
it's
'80s.
bad. It's bad.
It's got some ugly sounds.
I get it doesn't count as their worst because to me it's not a contender because it's only 5 songs. I give it a star though.
I gave it a half star for the Frank Stallone song.
And then in 1985, Barry, or let's call him Barfy from now on, because he was barfing out hits for people. Barfy did Diana Ross's Chain Reaction. To me, it's too dog shit 80s. Don't really connect with it. 2.5 stars.
I gave that 2.
Yeah, it's about right. Then we're into Bee Gees territory. Back to the band, 1987's ESP. Joe, if you don't mind, let's kind of skip through the remainder.
Yeah, okay, so ESP, 1987 is a shitty sound, just a shitty time for
Just
the way
gross
records sounded.
for everyone. There's no
And
low
this
end.
could have been any artist from 1987. You could have put any artist.
It was their
over this.
first album to be recorded digitally.
It's just completely indistinct production and arrangements. I mean, you can maybe overcome this if you have amazing songs, but which they did not have. Hopelessly dated. Sitting through this was a real chore. I was in traffic. It was in a really bad, horrible traffic situation where I just had to wait like 40 minutes to make a left turn, and that's when this was playing.
Yeah.
That was a terrible day.
First of all, yes, as far as the production goes, I simply cannot get over that cavernous digital.
This
drum
is the
sound.
part of making this show that's tough, is when you're in. This is a real.
It's okay. Let's just keep it moving.
We're just going to keep going.
Keep it moving.
Half a star.
But the material on this record sounds like the cereal left in the bottom of an unattended milk-sopped bowl. Okay, so the only song that was halfway decent is Angela. I give it a half star.
I gave it a half star. It did good in Europe. Bombed in the U.S. Next.
1989, 1. Okay, so
It's the number of stars that earned.
Right. There's nothing good.
I will say this is a slightly more pleasant listen than ESP. Slightly. It still sucks, but it's slightly better. They're going for adult contemporary radio.
And what had happened was Andy Gibb had passed away from snorting too much blow. And because Barfy wasn't barfing up the hits for him anymore. So
Now, the single went top 10. It was the title track, and it's pretty much they're still pastiching because it's pretty much an exact rip of the song "Perfect Way" by Scritti Politti. If you play them back to back,
right. Perfect Way is awesome.
Don't bother playing them back to back.
Yeah,
Don't
do
be
that.
like me.
Yeah, don't play metal songs backwards either.
I regret playing them back to back. Just take my
Look,
word for it.
This
it's
is
the same fucking song.
You know what's terrible about this record to me, and if we could please move on after this, that'd be great. Is Andy Gibb had died. This was their mourning album, and they can't even mourn credibly, as far as I'm concerned. I give this album 1 star.
I gave it 1 star. One. The album One earns 1 star.
That's right.
She said. Okay, next.
1991, High Civilization. This was a change for the Bee Gees. Definitely more drum programming, electronic effects. We're going modern. We're putting a diamond stud in our ear and pulling our hair back in a ponytail and riding a.
This one to me is the worst sounding one because
crazy,
It
yeah.
sounds so bad. It's like they're making generic 1991
I want to
shit.
point out that this album was 60 minutes long, 60 for
This
11
one's
songs.
this one's the most brutally unlistenable one to me. This one was like really hard to get through.
Yeah,
it's just very obsolete kind of music.
I give it 1.5 stars.
I gave this 0 stars.
Okay,
I hated this one.
I'm gonna put one song from this on the playlist. High Civilization, the title track. At least they're trying to do something different with the time signature wise,
we're gonna have
and
to-
with the new Marshall drum sound.
We'll have words about this. It's not going on
I give this record 1.5.
Wait, we're still on High Civilization.
Correct, sir.
Okay, no, that's no. It sounds like it's like 1991.
You don't give it 1.5?
I give it 0.
You do?
Yeah.
Okay.
It sounds like they're kind of trying to make like they just heard like Seven and the Ragged Tiger, and they're like,
Yes.
let's try to make that. No,
It just sounds
terrible.
so thin.
Okay, next.
All right, 1993. Size isn't everything. No more contemporary dance moves. This was supposed to be, quote, a return to our sound before Saturday Night Fever.
Well,
end
they tried. They did one thing that you could see. So, the first song, it was kind of you could see what they're going for. It's like a New Jack Swing kind of thing, you know, like they got into like a Bobby
It's
Brown
so
record or
sad.
something, you know, and then they just lift the melody. Well, no, they go back to the Banshee on this. That was the other big invention on this. That they did some New Jack Swing and they returned to singing in the Banshee voice, which they had abandoned for quite some time. So that was why this is going to be like a return to glory.
Also, Decadence was like a You Should Be Dancing super mix.
Right,
And a bizarre factoid is the song Haunted House features fucking Steve Howe on acoustic guitar of all people.
And there's definitely some songs that sound like they're kind of going for like a Bon Jovi kind of vibe.
Yeah.
It's like some power rock. Like,
I don't know what to make of this, but honestly, it is considered their best post-disco album. But to me, it's not worth listening to once all the way through. But I do give it 2.5 stars.
Ooh, that's
There's
very generous.
It is generous.
I gave it 1 star.
I understand. 1997, Still Waters.
Jesus, there's so many fucking things.
I know. This was their most successful in almost 20 years. And they were getting a lot of awards for lifetime achievements
They were
during
on
this time.
right, and they were on VH1 a lot, which
I want to say there's nothing good on this album. Like it's all there's half of it's bad and half of it's
it went to number 11 on the album charts, the regular U.S. album charts, and it stayed around long enough to go double platinum. So
that doesn't make any
that
sense.
shows you
to
how
me.
insane the record industry is in
I'll
1997.
give this platter of turds 1.5 stars.
I gave it the same.
Cool.
The title track is probably the best thing on it if you're really going to give this a spin, which I do not recommend.
I don't recommend it, and there's nothing from this that I would put on the playlist.
Not suitable for any living thing.
No, that's right. And then we come to their final album, 2001's This Is Where I Came In. Let me say about this, and Joe and I know are in agreement about this, because when we're not recording our thoughts about the Bee Gees, we have conversations about them. This, at least, they tried.
It
Are
should
you
have
in
been called
agreement,
At
sir?
Least We Tried.
At least we tried. This is where at least I
They're kind of
tried.
going for a guitar rock thing. Like there's kind of some acoustic guitar ones, and then this is like they're kind of like a return to being a guitar album. It's 2001, so it's pretty late in the game. Kind of more organic, sort of. Yeah, I don't know. It's there. There's a
look,
bunch
here-
of different kinds of things on it. They're
Yeah.
trying. It's like eclectic in
There's
the way that
even
they're,
one, that song Technicolor Dreams. It's like 30s Tin Pan Alley.
Yeah, I mean,
we're all over the
right,
place.
Yeah, there's
here.
some like When I'm 64 kind of shit. There's like
Right.
some 80s keyboard shit. There's some 70s yacht rock things. There's like
They're
there's
trying
some
new
techno. There's like there's a Baroque classical thing.
Here's the deal. They're donning all these new guises, but it's creatively, I believe it's too late because they went through such a high point in those 4 years. It has to change you in creative ways that can't be accounted for, and to experiment after decades of pumping out by rote songs, you're just going to have the shell. You're going to have whatever genre you pick.
Yeah, well, exactly. I was going to say something very similar. They were always kind of a thing that were chasing the trends.
Mm-hmm.
They were always very good at it. But from the very earliest days, they were chasing the thing like what's popular right now, and that served them well for a really long time. And a couple times they were sort of a little bit ahead of the curve on it. And like at the beginning of the disco era, they really exploded. They happened on it at exactly the right time. After their big mega fame, they're trying to jump on those trends, and they're just like a step behind.
Yeah,
they're just
kind of like Bowie in the '90s when he had his Jungle album with Earthling.
I can't even really place any of this stuff anywhere near the same like level of creativity. Or
no. Bowie was still doing good stuff.
Yeah, I don't even really love those Bowie albums, but I think he's still this is it, I think the Bee Gees in their late periods, they're really just like they're chasing the trends and not much else.
Right.
There's not a lot of songs or magical moments.
It happens with almost every artist. I mean, remember Madonna setting tons and tons of trends.
I will say some of these records that are kind of bad and that I don't like, it sounds like they're kind of having fun making them. Even like High Civilization, you can tell they're kind of, it has a goofing around in the studio kind of feel to it. And and the last one, This Is Where I Came In, it feels like they're kind of enjoying.
They're trying.
It.
I give it 2.5 stars.
I gave it 2.
Okay, so let's talk about the shape of this arc because it's interesting. So at the beginning, they're just kind of cruising altitude in Australia, and then for 3 years in the late '60s, they're flying high, not as high as they would eventually fly, but then How Can You Mend a Broken Heart was kind of the only thing that saw them through the first half of the '70s. Then they were on top of the world. Then they crash landed, and they kind of stayed there, except for a couple blips.
Yep, absolutely. That's pretty much exactly it.
Yeah. So what are your top 3, starting with number 3, sir?
My number 3 favorite Bee Gees album is Mr. Natural.
Nice.
My number 2 favorite album is Children of the World. And number 1, my number 1 most favorite Bee Gees album is Bee Gees First.
Nice. All right.
Honorable mention to Main Course. It's kind of a coin flip between Main Course and Mr. Natural for number 3. I went with Mr. Natural.
How about your worst album?
My worst album is the 1991 album, which
High Civilization.
High Civilization.
With the Marshall drum sound.
That's my least favorite one ever.
I'm going to put a song from it on the playlist.
No, I'm taking it off.
No, I'm going to put it back on after.
Everybody skip it.
I'm going to put it back on a second time. All right, so
make my own playlist.
I have to say that I counted Saturday Night Fever as an album.
Okay, fair enough. That would be probably number 1 if you count it as an album to me.
So it's not for me.
Okay.
My top 3, Mr. Natural at number 3, just like you, my brother. Mm-hmm. Number 2, Saturday Night Fever. Number 1, Bee Gees First.
Right. Okay, so pretty close.
Worst album would be 1987's thin, cavernous drum sound, piece of shit, mound of garbage, Kaminsky Park level puddle of turds, ESP.
That is a commendable choice.
Thank you.
You can't really argue with that.
So thanks for hanging in there. This has been the entirety of a very long career for the Bee Gees. Somehow we did it in 2 episodes. We knew that it could have been stretched out to 3, but you guys had better things to do than to wait around for 3 hours.
2 is just about right.
2 did it.
Yeah.
So we want you to please check us out on Facebook, on Twitter, on Instagram. You
follow us on Spotify or
send
Apple.
Send out carrier pigeon stuff.
Yeah, follow us on your podcast network. Recommend us to friends, and by all means, keep tuning in.
Yeah,
if the Bee Gees aren't your thing, we will certainly soon be covering something that is.
We'll be back with something wildly different. We have crazy episodes coming up. Keep tuning in. I'm Dave Gebrow.
I'm Joe Kennedy.
And this is Discography.
See you next time.